Welcome back, YouTube. Nick here with another video working on my 2005 Honda Rancher. Today I will be showing you how to do a rebuild on your carburetor. In this video I'll show you how to remove and disassemble the carburetor as well as put it back together. If you're wondering if you need to do this, if you're having any carburetor related issues, the machine not starting, the machine dying with throttle, or fuel draining out of your float, this could resolve those, and a rebuild kit is pretty cheap. Alright, let's jump in. The first thing we need to do is get access to the car by removing the plastic. You can pop the seat off and reach it from the top, but disconnecting the sides is quick and easy. There are a couple of plastic pins that go into these little Christmas trees on each side, as well as one bolt. Next to the storage compartment on the left hand side, there are also 2 screws. Once you remove the plastic from the machine, I like to pop the snorkel out on the intake so I have a nice open work area by the carburetor. Now that we have access, we need to disconnect the throttle cable, sensors, and the boots on each side so we can remove it from the machine and rebuild it on the workbench. The first step I tackle is getting that rear boot disconnected. I loosened the hose clamp and then wiggled the air box until I could slide it backwards. This will give us the space to pull the car back out of the motor and then lift it straight out. Once you get the space opened up, you should be able to wiggle it now out of the engine side boot. We can then start rotating and disconnecting cables. On the right hand side, the cable coming in is your throttle. You will start by breaking the nut free where it goes into the carburetor, but to actually disconnect it, we'll need to pull that side panel off, so we'll be back for that. The next cable is the one right on the front hand side. We will break the nut free at the base and spin until we can pop this one out. I am now going to move over to the far side of the machine to disconnect an electric cable that plugs in on the right hand side by your feet. The clip on this bad boy was the biggest pain in the ass. Take your time, you don't want to break anything, but I used a pick and small screwdrivers to pry up the tabs until I could wiggle and jiggle enough to pop it out. The only thing left to disconnect is the throttle cable. We already broke the nut free, so grab a Phillips screwdriver and loosen up this cover. Be careful with every Phillips screw on a carburetor. They're very easy to blow out. They get stuck over time. Use some PB Blaster if yours don't want to move, but don't strip them out. With the cover off, you will then disconnect the barrel end from the throttle. You may want to rotate the throttle mechanism with one hand while you disconnect the barrel with the other. This will give you a little more slack in the cable and make it easier. With that pulled off, we can then lift the carburetor out of the machine and go rebuild it. With the carburetor on the workbench, we will start by cleaning the hell out of this thing. I'm going to put that throttle cover back on. Use a ton of brake parts cleaner, carb cleaner, whatever you have, but really spend the time to make this thing nice and clean before you start the rebuild. Focus on your mating surfaces to make sure when you disassemble, dirt isn't getting inside. Also use this as time to grab a pick and clean out the head of any screws, as we will be disconnecting quite a few. Now that the outside is looking good, I'm going to pull the throttle cover back off and do inside of there. Nothing in the rebuild will be under this cover, so get it real clean and then put it back on. Alright, we've made it to the rebuild portion of the video. Today I am using a Tusk branded carburetor rebuild kit from Rocky Mountain. These were around $15 and had good reviews, so we're going to try it out. I will be swapping out that bottom gasket. The kit also comes with new bolts, which will be helpful on reassembly. After that, we're going to put in a few new jets, as well as the float bowl needle valve. First things first, we need to pull that bowl cover off. There are 4 Phillips screws in the corners. Make sure you clean these out with a pick before trying to remove. If you do end up stripping one out, I've had luck before using an impact screwdriver to pop one of these out on a dirt bike carburetor. but if you take your time and use tons of downforce, you should be able to break them free. You can see the inside of the cover is filled with gunk and grime from ages of use without any cleaning. I'm going to take a moment to clean the inside of the bowl and pop the gasket out, and then put it off to the side so we can start removing other components. The next thing we're going to do is remove the pilot jet. I advise that you take a picture of your carburetor before you pull this or your float out, as the ring around the pilot jet is directional and it can be a hassle to get it back in the right place if you don't know where it goes, and it is critical for the assembly. To remove the jets, you'll just grab a small metric socket and unthread them. Be extra gentle. You can break these off, and that is not good. Once you get the jets out, and as you're pulling pieces, make sure you put them off to the side and keep them neat and organized. You want to make sure as much stuff as you pull out, you put back in. Next, we are going to remove the float mechanism. To do this, you will need a small diameter punch, and there is a pin at the bottom that it pivots on. You will tap that out to remove. The reason this is called a float is because that plastic piece literally floats in the bottom of the fuel, and when the carburetor is full, it pivots upwards and presses on that needle valve, which stops the fuel from flowing in. If your carburetor is running when your petcock is on or it's dripping fuel, this is most likely your issue. Be extra careful, you don't want to damage the pin. You're going to need to clean that up, and we have a new needle valve. After that, we need to remove the main jet. This is recessed in one of those middle tubes, so you'll need a flathead screwdriver. Just like everything else, be extra careful. Once that is removed, there's another small jet circuit brass fitting on the side here. I did remove it because there was a new one in the rebuild kit, but I will be honest and say I have no clue what this little piece does. With everything removed, we are going to do a little more cleaning. This is your final chance to get it all nice before reassembly. With everything clean, I'm going to open up the new kit and lay out the parts next to those that I removed. I quickly noticed that this kit does not come with a new pilot jet. I do not have issues with starting, but while I have it removed, I'm going to fill a cap with carb cleaner and drop that jet in for around 15 minutes and then clean it up, blow it out before putting it back in. While the jet is soaking, I'm going to pull off the other cover and just see how dirty it is inside of here. You do not need to do this step. The spring here is what returns the slide to a neutral position. I gave everything a quick once over and then put it back together. All right, for putting things back in, I started by swapping out this little rubber piece that came in the rebuild kit. Pop that out with a pair of pliers and then pop the new one in. After that, I wipe off the pilot jet that's been soaking and put that back in. It goes in the middle long tube and you'll screw it down nice and gently. Next, I'll put the new main jet in. Same premise as before, nice and gently. After that, I'm going to put the weird side jet that I don't know what it does, but I got a new one in the carburetor. Now we're to the last step. We need to put the float mechanism back in. You're going to want to swap out the needle valve that is attached to the float. Flip that over and drop it into the carburetor. Lastly, you will need to re-pin this. Make sure you clean this pin a ton as it is the pivot. So when fuel gunks up on this, it's what causes floats to stick. The pin is also directional. Once it is pinned, make sure that the float moves freely and is tapping up against the valve. After this, we just need to put that little plastic piece back on. This is what you took your photo for earlier, so make sure you put that in the right direction. If you're having trouble, you can sit there and twist it and it'll kind of fall into place. There is a tube in the cover that goes through one of these slots. So if you want to sanity check and make sure it's right, drop it into place and then slide the cover over. Alright, you've officially rebuilt the carburetor and we're on to reassembly. While you have everything in place, make sure that float mechanism actuates properly up and down, and then you need to swap out the gasket on the cover and put it back on. I was on the struggle bus trying to get this gasket on the cover. I originally just put it on and it fell off and I couldn't get it to line up well. I ended up pulling the throttle cable cover off on the side so I had better access, and then putting a very small layer of grease around the gasket to kind of stick it in the groove while I lined everything up. Since this is a rubber gasket, a small amount of grease will not hurt anything, but you don't want to use a ton. Once you have your cover back on, your carburetor is fully reassembled and it is time to put it in the machine and test it out. We are going to follow the reverse process of how we took it apart for putting it back together. You're going to want to start with that barrel connector on the throttle cable because you want the most range of movement possible. Once you get that back on, put your cover on and then connect the other cables as well as that electrical plug. After that, connect the boots on both sides and you should be ready to test. If you're wondering why I have the fuel tank off, it is definitely not necessary, but I was also installing a new petcock while I had everything apart. I'll drop a video link of that at the end in case you need to do something similar. If you're having issues, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to help you out. But also, if this video did help, let me know that too so we can keep making this style of content. Thanks for tuning in and I'll catch you the next time my equipment breaks.